Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
I am fine, Ray. How are you tonight?
Outstanding. Today, our guest is an American counterterrorism expert, former FBI agent and SWAT team member, Tim Clemente. Tim, welcome to the show. Pleasure having you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been a
It
long
is,
time.
yeah. Tim and I crossed paths professionally and personally in the Bureau in Hollywood years later. And just to be clear, this is Tim Clemente. His older brother, Jim, I met at the academy on the first day, and we were friends in New York. And he told me about this younger brother of his, and this guy's really good. He's a great athlete. He's going to do things someday. And before long, I'm hearing you're in the St. Louis PD. And then in the FBI, then later in Hollywood, and we're going to hear all about this stuff down the line. But Tim, I know a little bit about Jim's background, but of course yours is going to be similar early on. Can you walk our audience through a little bit growing up, where you went to school, things like that, your interest?
Sure. As far as interests, I'll start with that. My interests were always law enforcement. I can't remember ever wanting to be anything but in law enforcement. Always wanted to be a cop. I know my sister a few years back found a autobiography I wrote in first grade, and it was about my life and what I wanted to do in the future of my life, and just said I want to be a police officer. So that had been something, I don't know where it came from, but it was ingrained in me from obviously a very young age. If in first grade I was reflecting on that history of wanting to be a cop. Um, Grew up, born in California, grew up in New York, outside the city for many years, went to high school, a county or two above New York City, and one of six kids, grew up in an Irish and Italian Catholic family, and my brother preceded me to the FBI, though I applied to the FBI first. And as you said, I ended up with the St. Louis Metro PD. Yeah, the day I graduated from college, I graduated on a Sunday. I said, all right, I'm a college graduate now. I'm going to the FBI. So the next morning I went down to FBI headquarters at 26 Federal Plaza in New York. I had graduated from Fordham University the day prior and said, I'd like an application. And I was told, nope, come back in 3 years. You're too young. And they said, I was only 21 at the time. They said minimum age is 23 and you have to have at least 3 years of work experience after college with a bachelor's degree. So I said, okay, I'll see you in a few years. And then a few years later, life was moving on. I ended up actually getting married in 1986, graduated in 82, and to my college sweetheart. And so life kind of got in the way of the FBI right then. And then a few years later, my brother Jimmy applied to the FBI. So he got in before me, and then I ended up with St. Louis Metro PD, the most violent city in America at the time, and advised for one of the most violent cities in the world, oftentimes. So that was a great job, a lot of fun, very exciting, never a dull moment, never a dull day.
Everything so far kind of made sense, the New York connection, 26 Fed, and what have you there. But what took you to the center of the country, St. Louis PD? I don't think you had family or anyone else there, right?
Did not. No, it was kind of a fluke. Ended up, I visited a buddy of mine that was in Missouri, and my wife and I kind of liked the area. And a couple of years later, we put our house for sale. And so we were living in Southern California at the time when we first got married, moved out there in 1985. I bought a house just outside Newport Beach in the Costa Mesa, Newport Heights area in Orange County, which was a great place at the time. California has changed dramatically since those years in
Yes, it
every
has.
way, in every way. So we were looking for some place that we could expand, spread our wings a little bit, and grow the family. My wife was pregnant with our second child in 1988, and early 89, we ended up buying some land and bought a place in Missouri, and ended up being about 50 miles outside St. Louis. We were able to get 108 acres of land for about 1/6 of what a little tiny garage-size house cost us in Southern California. So it was a question of economics and the ability to, like I said, expand and spread our wings a little bit as our family was growing. My wife was getting ready to have our second child. My son Josh was born when we lived in Missouri, and then that dream of wanting to be a cop never left me. My wife was adamant that she didn't want me to be a cop in New York or LA. So she fought me on applying to either of those departments. And then as the proceeds from the sale of our house started to run out and I had to look at getting a job again after renovating the place we were living in Missouri, I brought up the subject of being a cop again. My wife was somewhat adamant, but that resistance was slowly etched away as I convinced her that St. Louis was a great town. I could be a cop there and close by, and we could kind of live in the country. And some of that was true. I ended up did get hired on, did great in the academy, but St. Louis City PD had a residency requirement, so they required me to live in the city, and so we ended up having to sell the beautiful place we had in the country and move into the city. And that was a little bit of a challenge, but we liked it. And like I said, great work, exciting, never a dull moment. Lots of car chases and shootouts and foot pursuits. So it kept me busy and kept me entertained every day.
And then you had your second tour of duty where other stuff occurred, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was, I worked in what was called the Bloody Third, the south side of St. Louis, the 3rd District. And it was called the Bloody Third because it was such a violent police precinct. It was probably one of the most violent police districts in the world as far as per capita crimes. We had St. Louis in 1993 when I was a cop there, led the United States in homicides, I believe, and it set a record of 277 homicides, which doesn't sound like that much, but for a city that had less than 300,000 people, that's an astronomical crime rate. The average in the United States is about 1 homicide per 100,000 people. In St. Louis, it was about 1 per 1,000 people, so 100 times the national average. And in the district I worked, it was probably 500 times the national average.
Can you imagine that, Ray? Trying to patrol those streets?
Yeah, it's it kind of brings you to some of the things in Philly, North Philly, and then the city of Chester, PA. I mean, what he's saying there, I mean, we kind of looked at the city of Chester, which is much like that 3rd District in St. Louis, and they had about 28,000 people, but they had like 48 homicides one year, which if you take that, you're looking at 1,100 homicides a year, kind of similar to that area. So it was a pretty desolate place too. I mean, just driving around, it was just a tough place.
Yeah, it's hard for normal people to live in an environment like that. It's just there's no time to be safe. You can't keep yourself safe. You can't keep your family safe. You can't keep your business safe when the crime rates are that high.
No, you're right. You're right. It's difficult, very difficult.
And Tim, you were being modest, but I think you graduated at the top of your class from the FBI Academy in firearms and academics and everything else. And then you won a bunch of awards in only the 2 years you've been there. And hopefully you dodged a number of bullets and knife stabbings and those types of things too. As far as I know, you
Yeah,
did.
I did. Yeah, I actually, you said in the FBI Academy, in the St. Louis PD Academy, yes, I graduated number 1, which was fortuitous. It was great because the number 1 and number 2 in the academy were able to choose where they wanted to go to work on the job. So the day before graduation, myself and another Tim, his name was Tim Schubert, where we were called into the director's office of the academy of Sergeant Simfer. And he said, okay, Tim, you're number 1. Second, Tim, you're number 2. Where do you guys want to work? And I said, is the Bloody Third still the most violent district? And he said, yes, it is. And I said, well, that's where I'm going. Mm-hmm. And then the other Tim chose part of the town up north that was second most violent. I don't think we both could have ended up in the 3rd just because of a numbers game. But we were both happy. We were both working. We went there to be cops to work, not to write parking tickets and chase jaywalkers. We wanted to chase violent criminals and get them off the streets, put them away. It's what I had wanted to do, I think, since I wrote that autobiography in first grade. So
that says a lot about you, Tim.
It does.
Seriously, a lot of guys, when they get the choice of their choice of assignment, they're going to choose the easy way out a lot of times, but not you. And that's why you were a hell of an FBI agent too.
Well, I didn't take the job just to wear the badge or carry a gun. It was, it was a vocation for me. It always was. And I think for a lot of people in law enforcement, not necessarily all, certainly, but for a lot of people, it's a vocation. It's like, a doctor not wanting to save lives. Yeah, there are cops that want to sit behind a desk or don't want to do the job, or, you got guys on the street that hide in their car and don't answer calls and park under a bridge and take a nap or whatever. And that just wasn't me. If there was crime to be chased down and prevented, or crimes to be solved, that's what I wanted to do. And I enjoyed doing it. I mean, there were, despite the fact that we were in such a violent precinct in a violent city, there's still a lot of good people. There's a lot of good people that deserve the protection of the police and deserve to have good officers on the streets working for their efforts. And that's what I tried to be.
Tim, is it fair to say the DA's office in St. Louis back then, whatever that county was willing to work with the police and put truly bad guys behind bars? Because from what I understand, it's not that way out there now. Of course, it's not that way in most major U.S. cities, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not anymore. And I can't imagine being a cop now, especially in a place like St. Louis. But when I was there, yeah, the prosecutors were great. On the average, I mean, there were a few that were slouches and just didn't want to prosecute. They wanted 1,000% batting average. So anything that looked like it might be questionable whether the evidence was 1,000% there or not, that would cause a challenge for the cops sometimes. Why did you initiate this stop? Well, the guy was firing a gun out the window. And so I started pursuing him because it's illegal to fire a gun out the window. And during the pursuit, he threw the gun. And so we got him. Yeah, I never lost sight of him, did the pursuit, and then we didn't find the gun in the end. But, you have an officer saying the guy was shooting at me in a car moving, and I chased him. I never lost sight of him. I put the plate out immediately. And some prosecutors might say, I'm not going to prosecute that. You don't have the gun. You don't have his fingerprints on a gun. Well, I watched them. If we had body cams back there or dash cams, maybe they would have prosecuted. But so it was kind of frustrating in that regard in rare instances. But the vast majority of the prosecutors were gung-ho. They lived in the city too. They wanted the city to be safe, and it wasn't safe. So the only way to keep an unsafe city from becoming worse or to make it better is to put the criminal element where they belong. There's this push now with prosecutors all over the country that this tremendous leniency to the criminals and its punishment to the civilians, to the regular population that's living in these cities. It's absolute punishment. They're living in a penitentiary, so the criminals don't have to. And that's a sad state of affairs. It's no way to live.
It is. I have a question for you. How much time did you spend in St. Louis?
About 4 years on the job.
In that 4 years, what was your one takeaway, your most memorable moment? Whether it was the top case you worked when you were there or the most dangerous case, what was your one takeaway from there that, you know what, I'll never forget this one case when I was in St. Louis?
That's kind of an easy one, Ray. My first day on the job, my field training officer was driving me around our beat, and my beat was the 38th precinct in the 3rd District. So when we worked afternoon shift, it was car 2338. When we worked the day shift, it was 1338. And first day on the job, my training officer, Kurt, took me around the neighborhood, and we saw this guy coming out of a building, and he stopped the car, pointed to the guy, and said, "You see that guy?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "That guy's the worst criminal in this city. He's a drug dealer, he's a gang leader, and he's a killer. And we've tried to pin so many homicides on him, but he always seems to slide out. The victims victim's family, witnesses, somebody will back out in the end because they're too terrified to testify against him, or that he's threatened them." And he said, so at least a half a dozen times over the last few years, we've tried to get murders on him. And this is a guy that's on parole for murder and committing other murders, just a heinous criminal. So that was my first day on the job. And I vowed at that moment, okay, that guy's not going to survive here with me here. And it took 3.5 years, but I ended up coming up against this guy in a shootout, coming up against him. He and a couple other four other gangbangers were going out to do a drive-by hit on a rival gang that had killed one of their guys the night before. And so they were driving with their lights off, coming down an alley, and I happened to encounter them. They backed out of the alley, drove backwards down the street. I was chasing them. Then they rammed my police car. 4 guys jumped out shooting. One of them was this guy, and ended up in a shootout in a long foot pursuit. And the nice thing about being in a city PD, unlike some cops that work very remote locations in states all across America, state troopers that are the only guy for 100 miles at night, that wasn't the case in St. Louis. I hit my orange emergency button on my radio and the cavalry comes instantly. And so there's 50 to 100 cops en route within seconds. And so we were able to round all these guys up, got them, got the guns. And this guy was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder on police officer, myself, and another cop that happened to be behind me when this guy was shooting at me. Assault first degree for ramming my police car with his car. And then the parole violation from the prior homicide that he was convicted of, the gun violations for a criminal in possession of a gun. He actually had 2 guns that night. And so adding it all up, the judge, the prosecutor was great. The judge was even better. Judge gave him 463 years to life. And she said, with good behavior, you'll be able to get out after 350 years.
Nice.
So it's a memorable case. And it was a guy, and as a matter of fact, one of the other coincidences in the story, the cop that pulled up behind me when I was chasing them down the street happened to be my former field training officer, Kurt. And so he was behind me. He and I were both the victims of attempted murder, first-degree murder of a police officer by this guy. So Kurt, I said to him later that night, remember when I told you, when you told me about him the first day, that I was going to get him? We got him. So that was a proud feeling.
Did you get a chance to talk to him at all?
I did talk to him, not during the trial, but after the trial. He filed an appeal because of that sentence, and so we had to do a hearing in the jail. The judge would not let him out to come back into the courtroom, and so for the appeal hearing, myself, the prosecutor, defense attorney, and the judge went to visit this guy in jail, and we sat down in front of him, and he complained about the sentence, and the judge said, are you saying that you didn't commit these crimes? And he said, no, this is a, ridiculous sentence. And his lawyer reiterated that. And the judge said, well, basically she quoted Beretta, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. And she said, I used everything that the books allowed me to use to throw at you. You were convicted of prior murders. And she said, guess what? Homicide Division now has 5 other cases that the witnesses are no longer afraid to testify against you, and there's no statute of limitations on homicide. So she said, even if you were to win on this appeal, you now are facing multiple other homicide charges because you're in prison now, and the witnesses aren't being intimidated by you anymore. So it was walked out of there saying, all right, that was a great meeting. And I looked at him. I looked at him before it was over, and he tried to give me the evil eye. He was a really scary looking dude, but he tried to give me the evil eye, and I just smiled at him and I said, doesn't work anymore. Nobody's afraid of you. You're behind bars. You're going to be wearing pinstripes for the rest of your life. Enjoy it.
Words he'll live by forever.
Well, now I'm curious to hear your first day at the Washington field office. Were you driving around Southeast and said, I'm going to get that guy?
No, actually, my first day at WFO, I was assigned to International Narcotics Squad, C-13, and graduated, showed up the next day to WFO, and met my supervisor, met my, field training agent for a couple of weeks. But I hit the ground running. The first day on the job, I was the last one in the office at the end of the day because I'm trying to read up on cases and figure out what's going on and what this work is actually like. And I get a call, a couple of LA division agents were flying into Washington, D.C. to meet with the former president of Mexico about a drug investigation. And so I happened to get the call. I was the only drug agent left on the floor. And I had to pick them up at the Reagan National Airport, drive them to go meet with the former president of Mexico. So I sat in on an interview with a former head of state on an international narcotics investigation on my first day on the job. And I was like, this is a little different than the St. Louis PD. Yeah. No shots were fired, no high-speed chases, but it was still great, realizing you're at that level of investigations.
And this would have been 1995-ish.
November 1995. Yep.
Okay. Amazing story there. And at some point, we kind of became neighbors in Stafford County, and that's when I got to meet you. But I think even before you got in the FBI, Tim, I still tell this story, and I usually reference your brother Jim, but you were there. I always say the closest I ever came to death was with you, Tim, with the Clemente brothers. Do you remember that whitewater rafting trip we took together in West Virginia in the early
I do.
90s?
That was
At
great.
one point, it was a great trip. You're right. It went, oh, you guys can get out of smooth water here. I go rolling down the water, life vest on. It was like late September, maybe early October, and they emptied a dam right before that. And I'm scrolling down and just going, this is pretty cool. You guys are up ahead. I go over a rock. I feel my butt going sliding down. Next thing you know, I'm caught like in the
Turbulence.
vertical whirlpool going on. And luckily, the vest keeps bringing me up. And I'm a decent swimmer. I still swim a mile, a couple times a week. And I was a good swimmer. I said, "This ain't good. I've been a
Yeah.
cop myself in foot chases and in shootouts and knives pulled on me. And same with FBI. Then all of a sudden, is this going to be how it goes? Hey, Clemente brothers, get back here!" And sure enough, I finally pop out. Whatever the signal was, peace or okay, and they all wave. And I said, "You guys know
Yeah.
what happened?" And you said, "Oh, don't
Yeah.
worry, we give better rapids up here." So
Well, that's
I'm
the
trying to
that's the
keep.
problem. Sometimes you can survive where it's pitting your wits or your skills against another human being, but Mother Nature has different rules. And you were in. I remember it was a big boulder next to you, and it was like a vertical whirlpool that you were
Yes,
stuck in, where it just kept pulling you down and regurgitating you. And yeah,
but
but it was fun. You survived, so it
I,
made
I
the
did, and I'm
evening
better
more
for
fun.
it. As Nietzsche would say, it only strengthened me. Probably not to do whitewater rafting anymore, or at least get out of the raft. But yeah, trying to
Yeah.
keep things chronological here. So, but interestingly, you working that a drug case, sort of inadvertently, your first night, your first day in the bureau, you got pretty heavy duty into that, including doing some undercover work involving South America. I know we're getting a little bit ahead here because there's so much you did in your career in WFO, but you were actually buying drugs from bad guys or pretending you're a money man. How did that work out?
Yeah, I was a money man working with the guy that I got out of prison after he did about 23 years federal time. He was a drug smuggler pilot, and he had written a letter to try and help a younger prisoner on a bad sentence. This prisoner, his first arrest, got 22 years for his first dope conviction, and it was astronomical at that time. And so this guy that was a fluent Spanish speaking white half Panamanian guy, and he was a pilot, and so he had a commercial license. He had his own plane, and he flew back and forth to Colombia and other places in South America, primarily initially as a geologist. He owned well drilling and oil drilling equipment, and he would sell it, buy it from depreciating markets like in Texas in the 70s and 80s, and then sell that stuff down in South America at a huge profit. And then the cartels would notice him flying in and out, and they would approach him regularly saying, "Hey, why don't you fly something back for us, back to the United States?" And he said no until he finally said yes. And when he said yes, did his first load, got arrested his first trip.
Oh boy.
And the reason he got arrested was he flew into particular areas around Colombia and other South American countries delivering these drilling wells and other equipment. And when he picked up the dope, he flew out of another location. So he had to fly to a cartel airstrip, pick up the dope, and
Mhm.
fly out, thinking, I've flown into the U.S. 100 times from here and never had a problem. Well, those other 99 times, you didn't fly from that airstrip, which, U.S. Customs, CIA, FBI, DEA, every other agency on the planet is watching because they know it's run by the cartel. So this guy gets arrested. It turns his life upside down, goes back to a life of crime because he has no normal life left. His wife has left him. He's lost his house, lost his job, lost the ability to sell this stuff. So all he can do now is fly for the cartel. So he does that for about 40 years, with 23 of those years being in prison. So he had his ups and downs financially, obviously, would make millions of dollars, lose it all, make millions again, lose it all. And so he did a lot of time in federal prison, was a smart guy, knew everything about the cartel. he wrote a letter to the cop that had arrested this kid that got 22 years. And he was pleading, at the mercy that, hey, can I'll help this kid if I can. So me and that cop drove out to the prison in Cumberland, Maryland to visit this guy and said, all right, what do you want to do? What can you do to help this kid? And he breaks out this little black book he's got, and he's got everybody in it. I mean, Pablo Escobar's personal cell phones. He's got Pablo's mother, his sisters, brothers, cousins, everybody in the Cali cartel, people in Medellin. He is so connected all over. He had worked directly for Manuel Noriega at one point in time because he got arrested with a load of cocaine in Panama, and Noriega arrested him, brought him to him, and said, "You don't work for Escobar anymore. You work for me." And so this guy had some stories to tell, and he had some adventures in his life. But at this point, he was in his early 60s, and he was thinking, hey, life's over for me. I'd like to help this young kid. And I said, well, what if life's not over for you? What if you could help yourself and help that kid? And he said, I'd be willing to try. And so he and I worked together. I set up an undercover business. And the great thing about working in the Bureau is the resources you have to do these things is so much greater than, like the narcotics guys in the St. Louis PD didn't have the budgets or the opportunities we did working with the Bureau and or the assets. I got to work directly with the CIA Counter-Narcotics Center, so we were able to direct satellites to use to watch locations in Colombia. So we could, when I went down there undercover for meetings and to set up, the big thing we were trying to do was set up a plane load. We had a couple of CIA undercovers that were our pilots that were going to work with my guy to fly a huge shipment up from Colombia. And we worked on the case for a few years. And unfortunately, I was down in Colombia at the time when the State Department shut down the case. We had everything set to go. All the dope was laying out on the side of a runway waiting for our plane to come in. I was in Bogota, and the plane was going to go into Barranquilla, Colombia, and everything was ready to go. Bad guys were all excited. Good guys were all excited. And then the Secretary of State sends a teletype to the embassy in Bogota saying, cancel the operation. We're negotiating a new extradition treaty with the Colombian government, and we're afraid that this case will affect that extradition treaty. And so politics trumps law enforcement in this case, and the case was shut down after more than 3 years of working around the clock on it. So that was kind of disappointing, but we did a couple other cases and got a lot of dope and a lot of convictions. We put a hurt on the Cali cartel for sure back then.
What exactly is for our listeners' purposes, what exactly is the Cali cartel?
Well, the way it works with narcotics is you got to think of narcotics like Walmart. Walmart's got products. It has to get the products to the customers. Then it has to get the money from the customers and get it to Walmart's headquarters or to Walmart's banks. So a cartel, if you're an individual and you want to grow cocaine, process cocaine, distribute cocaine, sell cocaine, and reap the profits, good luck. It's an almost impossible task. So a cartel forms, and it's a criminal entity that's like a military. And so no different than La Cosa Nostra with the mafia, except these guys are spread out across continents. And so you got the growers that might be in Bolivia, Peru, in the jungles of Colombia that are growing the coca plants. And then you got to process it. So you need a processing plant. So you need to have individuals, slave laborers, basically working, processing the coca leaves into cocaine, into the dry cocaine hydrochloride or crack if it's processed into that. So now you got the product that's somewhere in a jungle in Colombia or someplace else in the tri-border region in South America. And you got to get that product now to its market. And the market is primarily places in the West. So it's Europe, the United States. It's not really much in developing countries. You're not going to send a lot of cocaine to India, to, Kuala Lumpur. You're going to send it to New York City. You're going to send it to Los Angeles. Yeah, they don't have the money for recreational drug use because they don't have the money for food and housing and clothing. But in developed first world countries, it's a first world problem. People waste their money on things like that and destroy their lives with drugs. So that's the market. So now how do you get it there? Now you have to have a distribution network. So that means planes, trains, automobiles, or boats. You got to use it all. And then you need transshipment facilities. So you need a place in the location where it's going to go. So the drugs are going to come into the United States. Where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go to a transshipment point. They're going to go to Chicago and then get sold throughout Chicago, all over the neighborhoods of Chicago. So you need now a distribution point locally. And then on top of that, you need your street salespeople. You need the guy that's going to sell dime bags of marijuana and little packets of cocaine and collect $10, $50, $100 at a pop, give it to the guy he's working for, who gives it to the guy he's working for. And now you got a problem with transshipment in the opposite direction. So now the street level dealers just in Chicago in a day might take in millions of dollars, with a load of cocaine that came in a week before. How do I get that millions of dollars back to me, the guy that's running the cartel in Cali, Colombia, or Medellin? And that becomes the bigger problem than the cocaine, because the volume of cash, volume and mass is greater than the volume and mass of the drugs. So what you had to bring in is a small quantity. What you're bringing out now is large quantities, especially because most of it's in small bills. Because if you're selling it for $5, $10, $35 a hit on the street, you're getting a lot of small, dirty bills. And now you have to do some cleaning. So that's where the money laundering comes in. How you buy a car dealership in Miami and you bring your load of dope up to Miami, you sell it, then you bring the cash to the car dealership. The car dealer unloads a bunch of junk cars and then pads their books. So they buy a car for $500 at auction. They sell it for $1,000. They put the selling price down as $5,000. And now they've got $4,000 of dope money that they've just cleaned, because they can put it in the bank in Miami and wire it back to Colombia or wherever it's going. So that's what a cartel is, basically taking all of those different entities and putting them under one umbrella. And it gives them the ability to have as much control as possible over their business enterprise, which is wholly illegal in every aspect and everything they do. And it affects a lot of other businesses, some of which appear to be legitimate, but really aren't. So the job of the investigators that are working cartel cases is to find out. For instance, I had a car dealership in Miami that we seized on one case, and they had 300 cars. They had millions of dollars in the bank, and we made a bunch of arrests. And that car dealership was vouching for, money laundering for, and handling a lot of business affairs for the cartel. And so you had some legitimate Americans that didn't know they were working for the cartel, working for the Cali cartel at a dealership in South Florida. But in the end, the owners of that dealership and the people that were moving the money around knew very well what they were doing.
And you mentioned Pablo Escobar earlier. He was like the top man in South America, right? During the years you're discussing here.
Yeah, he had actually, before we started the case, we were doing the big load with the Cali cartel. He had actually been killed by then, but and so he was out of the picture. But the Cali cartel was still very active, and his underlings were vying for control of the cartel. So there was a lot of turmoil there, and we got on one case we had a dozen arrests, and we had one outstanding fugitive that was still in Colombia, and he ended up, because so many of his cohorts ended up going to prison, he ended up getting killed by the cartel because he was a rising star. But unfortunately, that star got shot down when they realized that he was kind of the common denominator for a lot of these other guys going to prison.
Interesting. You're working all these Colombian cartels, and I guess you're part of the International Narcotics Squad, and then you move over to the National Capital Response Squad. What the heck is it, for our listeners' purpose? What's the difference?
All right. So 1998, Osama bin Laden issues a fatwa against Americans everywhere, where, kill Americans anywhere you can, anytime, because they're all the devil. And so when that fatwa came out, the United States, under Attorney General John Ashcroft, decided, hey, we got to do something. We got to prepare, because this could get ugly. And so U.S. embassies in East Africa were attacked that late that summer, 1998. I think it was August 7th. 2 embassies were blown up in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. And I was at that time part of the SWAT team, the FBI SWAT team, and we were sent over to handle security and to be investigators. We wear dual hats in the FBI, other than the hostage rescue team, which is dedicated solely to the tactical side. Regular SWAT guys were investigators first, and we're SWAT members second. And so on deployments like going to East Africa at that time, when you have the biggest terrorists in the world threatening to kill Americans everywhere, there's a real concern for the security and safety of any personnel that are going to do that investigation. And so several of us SWAT guys went over, worked that case. I was both in Kenya and then in Tanzania, spent about a month in East Africa at that time. And then 1999, so fast forward a year later, the Attorney General had mandated that the FBI come up with some capability to react to events like that in a more timely manner, because the problem was when those embassies were attacked, when the bombs went off, it took a couple of days for the FBI to figure out what personnel were needed, what kind of expertise was needed, what security was needed, what equipment was needed, what clothing was needed, what tools were needed, what food and water was needed, what transportation was needed. So all of those questions were kind of being answered on the fly, and we're trying to get a team onto the ground there as soon as we could. But it took a day or two to get all the personnel and equipment we needed there. And so in 1999, September, I was at SWAT training down at Quantico, and I get a text message, "Hey, report to your new squad." And I was like, "What new squad?" I didn't apply for another position. And I was, ordinarily in the Bureau, as you guys know, most assignments you volunteer for, you apply for, you try out for, you get selected for in a process. In this case, the Bureau just said these people from these skill sets are forming this new squad. So because I was on the SWAT team, I was a post-blast investigator as well, certified to do post-blast investigations. So I got yanked to that squad. No questions asked, no input required. You report there tomorrow morning. And that squad, the National Capital Response Squad, was our assignment was that we protected the National Capital Region, Washington, D.C., and then the world was broken up into 5 major sections for the 5 largest field offices of the FBI. So you had the New York Division, which handled basically Scandinavia and former Soviet states, Northern Europe. Washington, D.C., we had Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Miami had Central and South America. And Los Angeles Division had Asia. And then Chicago had basically the northern territories, Canada, Iceland, Greenland, things like that. So
everything that's left.
Yeah. And so, Washington field office, we got the Middle East. That was part of Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. And so things go boom more often in the Middle East than a lot of other places. So we were the first to set up this National Capital Response Squad model. It's been replicated in other cities. New York and Los Angeles have them now. I'm not sure what other offices do. But it was basically all the specialties within that FBI division. So SWAT, weapons of mass destruction, evidence response team, hazardous materials response team, all of the leaders in those units, which are all secondary duties within most field offices for the FBI, we were all put on one squad. And so our mission was be prepared for whatever might happen. So we set up a forward deployment base in Ramstein, Germany, at Ramstein Air Force Base, where we set up a warehouse, put all the equipment, clothing, food, water, everything we might need for any environment that we had responsibility for. So anything that might happen in Europe, Africa, or the Middle East, we had to be prepared to react to and respond to quickly. And so you fast forward to 2000, now a year after the squad is formed, 2 years after the embassy bombings, and the next major terrorist attack was the USS Cole in Aden, Yemen, October 12th, 2000. And so when that attack happened, by that time now, I'm on the squad for over a year. I had been certified by the Air Force as an Air Force load planner. I had to go through multiple iterations of training with the Air Force at Andrews Air Force Base to get certified, so that on October 12th, when that bomb went boom, we got the call, or text actually, report immediately, we're deploying. And so I went directly to Andrews Air Force Base, And we also had equipment that we staged there, and we were able to load pallets. I was able to dictate what the weights would be, where they would go on the plane, and then I just say to the pilot, whatever plane rolls out on the tarmac, okay, here's my load plan for your aircraft. This is how many bodies we're putting on. This is how much equipment. This is how many pallets. This is where they're going. Let's get off the ground as fast as we can. So within a matter of hours this time, we're able to put all the gear we need onto a plane, an Air Force 141 cargo plane, and fly to Aden, Yemen, where we started the initial investigation. We were on the ground less than 24 hours after the bomb went off, with about 60 personnel, vehicles, and everything we needed on the cargo plane on the ground in Yemen. So that kind of proved the concept of why the National Capital Response Squad was formed. And it was a concept, as I said, that's been replicated in other cities and has been successful on a number of international investigations, some very well known, like 9/11, and some far less well known that are just small investigations. The murder of an American citizen in a jungle in Rwanda was handled by our squad or the Joint Terrorism Task Force, with the same capabilities, but on a much smaller scale.
Interesting. I understand you're somewhat of a Somalia terror expert. And in that time period, there was a lot of cargo ships that were being attacked by Somalia pirates. Mm-hmm. Were you involved in any of that?
Yeah. I think in 2000, I started working Somali terrorism because we were actually tracking down some of the perpetrators of the Black Hawk Down attack. So if you remember, Shugart and Gordon, two Delta Force operators that won the Medal of Honor posthumously, were captured and killed by Somalis during the Black Hawk Down incident, where we lost a Black Hawk pilot was taken away alive, and the Delta guys went in there trying to rescue the pilot, and then ended up getting captured and losing their lives. And there was a lot of footage on news reports around the world that showed this just crowd of angry people attacking these guys and dismembering them on film. It was horrible. Well, it turns out after that incident, a lot of people immigrated to the United States from Somalia. They had been facing a drought for, by that time, 7 years, which is why U.S. forces and other forces were in Somalia at that time, trying to feed the poor and the hungry there in Somalia. And Somalia is probably the poorest country on the planet still to this day. It hasn't had much of a functioning government in 31 years. And so it was a problem child then. It's really not gotten any better. I can't say that it's gotten worse, but it hasn't gotten any better. And so we were working this case, and then that led to revelations that when the United States went into Afghanistan after 9/11, so 2002 timeframe, we were in Afghanistan hunting down bin Laden and other terrorists in Tora Bora and other places in Afghanistan. A lot of the Al-Qaeda suspects that we were hunting were fleeing down through the Gulf of Aden into the Horn of Africa, into Somalia, because Somalia was a lawless country, no central government at the time, hadn't been for 7 or 8 years. And so they were able to hide out in northern Somalia and do so anonymously. Some of them were protected. The Somalis are overwhelmingly a majority Muslim country, so other Muslims can travel through there and not appear suspect or stand out. And so these individuals from Afghanistan, a lot of Al-Qaeda members, were hiding out in Somalia. And so I developed an intelligence network with several sources in Somalia, including a few that were high up in local Somali governments. And one of my sources ended up becoming the president of Somalia in 2005 in a general election there. But so those sources were extremely helpful. They were very much wanting to be on the side of the United States. They were not the attackers of Black Hawk Down. They were the ones we were there with, trying to work with. And so they had never forgotten the heroism and the generosity of the American people and the American military from 1993 when those guys were killed. They by many Somalis that were attacking them, and that was particular clans that were attacking them. and attacking the the shipments of food and everything else, and stealing them and selling the food to people instead of distributing it to the poor. So you had Mohammed Farah Aidid was the big warlord we were after at that time in the 90s. So his followers were very much against America, but a majority of the Somali people were not. They were very much pro-American, but unfortunately they were drowned out by the radical forces there. And so we worked for a few years with the Somalis in local governments and even in a transitional federal government when it was established, to try and bring some of these Al Qaeda guys that were hiding out there to justice. And there was some luck, and some unfortunately got away.
I want to throw one thing out to you, Tim. This is maybe a little bit after your time when you kind of got out of that and kind of transitioned to some other things. But you remember the movie Captain Phillips?
Absolutely.
Did you have anything to do with that?
I didn't have anything to do. I didn't work that case or the movie, but one of the guys on my squad, Tom O'Connor, who was on the JTTF, which the National Capital Response Squad was attached to. So Tom worked that case. Tom was with the captain he spent a lot of time with the captain. They're still good friends to this day. And so that was a case that was worked off our joint squad. But I didn't work it because it wasn't under the bailiwick of what I was doing. It wasn't a terrorism related case. As far as the pirates go, the problem with piracy in Somalia is greater than anywhere else, because again, it's a lawless region. But there's two reasons for the piracy. One, totally illegitimate reason of just greed, going after ships that are coming by. You have RPGs and you got a little skiff. You go out there and you start threatening boats or shoot RPGs at them or fire some AK-47s, get them to stop, hold the boat hostage, get what you can for a ransom. That's what some pirates do. Other pirates try to act like a Somali Coast Guard. Since there is no central Somali government, there is no central Somali Navy, there's no Somali Coast Guard, and you have illegal fishing going on around the clock in Somali waters. And Somalia has some of the most prosperous fishing grounds in the world because of the confluence of the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea meeting at the Gulf of Aden and the Horn of Africa. It's got incredible warm water fisheries there that are just teeming with wildlife. And so it's very ripe fishing grounds. And when you have no government to patrol it, illegal fishing goes on there all the time. And it goes on there around the clock. There's no rules that are being followed. There's no limitations on how many crabs or how many fish or how many salmon or whatever else they're getting out of there. There's no daily limits. And so a lot of the Somali pirates start out with good intentions, or some of them, I should say. I don't know a lot. And they're out there trying to patrol the Somali waters and chase off the bad guys. And then they ended up kind of morphed from chasing off the bad guys to holding the bad guys hostage, to taking their boats and demanding ransoms. So there's been a kind of a morphing of those two causes into what has become a rampant problem in that region and remains so today. We, obviously in Djibouti, there's bases now where militaries, including our own, are based out of to try and fight the pirate problem, but it still continues to this day. It's a vast open area, and there's a lot of other issues in the region that take the Navy and other entities' attention away from the pirates sometimes. But every once in a while, you'll hear those stories, and they'll be back in the news again.
Yeah, and those pirates are a bit different than Jack Sparrow and the Pirates of the Caribbean. Not quite as benign and as jocular as them. But you mentioned the president of Somalia. I remember your brother showing me either pictures or videos or both. Didn't you develop like a really close relationship with him? And you were like at his inauguration and invited into his palace and stuff. It was really cool. You're like his right-hand man for a while or something?
Yeah, well, I became kind of an unofficial advisor to him on counterterrorism matters. And he was helping us on terrorism matters. He was helping us try and nab these Al Qaeda guys. He had initially been the president of what was considered a breakaway region of Somalia called Puntland. So Somalia, the Horn of Africa, it's a skinny, it comes over and it comes down. So it's like an inverted V, a sideways V. And at the top left corner of Somalia, you have Somaliland, which has traditionally been under British rule, and it's kind of a British colony almost. And it has considered itself a breakaway republic and a separate country for many, many years, but it's not recognized by many other countries. And then just to the east of there, up to the corner of the Horn of Africa. And when I say the Horn of Africa, it literally looks like a horn. It sticks like this in the northeast corner of Africa. The next part is Puntland. Puntland is a large region. It's on the Gulf of Aden, out to the Indian Ocean. It's a geographically diverse region. And so this guy, Abdullahi Yusuf Ahmed, ran that region. He was a colonel. He was a warlord prior to that, colonel in the Somali military prior to that. But he became the president of this region, Puntland. And then further down, you have a couple other big areas, Ras Kamboni, you have Mogadishu all the way down in the south, Kismayo, some bigger Hargeisa, some bigger cities and towns that really were all part of the greater rest of Somalia. And so when he was the leader of Puntland, in the early 2000s, they wanted to try and establish a federal government again. And so they held peace talks in Nairobi, Kenya. Most of the leaders and warlords went to Kenya and met for many, many months trying to figure out how all these rival factions and these rival quote unquote states could reform as one nation of Somalia. And so I met with him many times, talked to him. I talked to him on a daily basis for a couple of years when he was helping us. And then when he asked for my help, it was hard to say no because, it's not like it's a tit for a tat. It was that this guy's trying legitimately to help us on the war on terror, and him ascending into a more prominent position and leading that country is very, very beneficial to our cause in trying to fight Al-Qaeda around the world. And so we developed a very trusting relationship, and he came to the United States in 2005 for the UN General Assembly in September 2005. Every September is the UN General Assembly where leaders from all over the world come, spend about a week at the UN, they give speeches, and they all, jabber. And he was coming in for that. And I met with him, and he wanted to meet my family. He came to Washington, D.C., and so invited my wife and all my kids he was staying at the Intercontinental Hotel by the White House. And he had high-level meetings with the U.S. government. And one of his first meetings was to have my wife and my kids come and have him officially introduce them to his wife and his kids. So, yeah, we ended up becoming good friends, which is not normal in a working relationship like that. But under the circumstances, it was unavoidable. He trusted me, I trusted him, and he did some great things to help the United States. Some great things, and to help the world, to make the world a safer place.
Knowing the Bureau as I did, and I would say do, something tells me you may have ruffled some feathers with some higher ups, hanging out with a president of an African country without perhaps proper protocols or bringing big bosses in. I think I recall something like that.
Yeah. I was told by our SAC when he invited me to the inauguration when he was becoming president in Nairobi, Kenya. And so I went to the boss, said, hey, new president of Somalia is being inaugurated, happens to be a good friend of mine. He wants me to be there. I just wanted to let you know in case, some higher ups wanted to go. And he said, well, we might send some higher ups, but you're not going. And I said, well, he insists that I be there because he credits me with him surviving and being the president of Somalia. And I said, so, it would kind of be rude for me not to be there. But yeah, anybody, the director wants to go. If the legal attaché in East Africa in Nairobi wants to go, that's fine. I'll make sure they get invited too. And he said, nope, you're not going. So I said, all right, then I'll be on vacation. And took a little time off and went to Nairobi and was at his inauguration because although my boss didn't see the legitimacy or the need for that trip, I did. I mean, it may have burned a very valuable relationship. And I mean, this guy at that time, General Tommy Franks, was, executing the war in Afghanistan, commander of CENTCOM. And he wanted to meet with the president of Somalia. And so when he went to meet with the president of Somalia, I got a call from the president saying, hey, there's a friend of yours, says he's a friend of yours. His name's Tommy. And I said, Tommy? Yeah, I'm Tommy who? And he said, I think his last name's Frank. And I said, General Tommy Franks is there? And he said, yes, he insists that he wants to see me. And he used your name. And I said, yeah, great guy, good friend of mine. Sure, meet with him. So it got to the point where, the U.S. military realized the strategic importance of Somalia at that time, physically, its location geographically, and they couldn't, do the best efforts to execute the war in Afghanistan without the assistance of Somalia. So had I not been at his inauguration, who knows, how offended he would have been and what might have happened. Maybe nothing would have happened. But in the end, good things did happen because I was there.
Good for you.
Except for WFO. The bosses in WFO were their undies were in a bundle for sure. But they got over it, I'm sure.
Do you know the status of that particular president today?
He died in, you think, what year did he die? He died about 3 years later, I think 2007 or 2008. He had a kidney transplant, a couple of years before I met him, so late 90s. And it had always adversely affected his health, the kidney problem, and he eventually succumbed to it. He was probably close to 80 by that time. He was in his 70s in the when he became the president, but he looked much younger. He was physically very healthy. And Somalis have tremendous skin. They don't age. They don't wrinkle at all. So the difference between a 30-year-old Somali and a 70-year-old Somali is very hard to tell. They just have very robust skin that survives the climate they live in there. And he looked much younger, but he was a wise old man. Great.
That happens in Ireland too, by the way, Tim.
Really?
People in Ireland, it's the Guinness, I think, that helps with the skin not wrinkling. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's
raised 40 years old, and look how good he looks.
He looks almost good as you do at 85, Jim.
There you go. Thank you. I knew that was coming.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks. I owe you one.
On that pleasant note.
You owe me a Guinness.
Absolutely. I got you.
So I know a few years later, an Esquire magazine article came out, and the author was quoted as saying, "Tim is an excellent terrorist hunter." And I'm sure the president that you mentioned would vouch for that. And it may have kept him alive despite his health issues to a ripe old age of 80. So no doubt you played some kind of a role in that. But at some point, you morphed out of the Bureau. And I remember following a little bit of what you were doing. I think you were in Iraq for a while, helping the troops over there. Tell us a little bit. Was that in the Bureau or post-Bureau, I think? How did that work out?
It was both. So in 2004, I deployed for the first time to Iraq as part of the National Capital Response Squad, doing investigations, major bombings, basically, in Iraq. Did that again, went back actually in the summer of 2004. I spent a few months the first time, went back June or July of 2004, and was there to train the Iraqis. And then in late 2006, let me back up. When I was there in 2004, I met with the Iraqi police, and I was basically assigned to work with the Iraqi police to figure out the crime networks and we were fighting a counterinsurgency at that time. The major battles, the tank battles had ended, so we were no longer fighting military to military. The military was now fighting an insurgency, and a counterinsurgency is far different than executing a normal war. You don't use a lot of artillery, you don't use a lot of tanks and flyovers with jets, because you have basically a criminal element acting as an insurgency element. And an insurgency is no different than what I mentioned before about the Cali cartel. All insurgencies are funded by some kind of contraband. No insurgency exists on the planet without some kind of contraband to raise revenue. And that could be narcotics. In the case of, you look at the Taliban in Afghanistan, their poppies were grown and they processed heroin and other things, hashish, from their crops, and that was how they funded their insurgency. That's how they had funded the Taliban government and the insurgency to become the Taliban government in Afghanistan. And so in Iraq, you didn't have narcotics, so you had other things that they had to do. And so one of the things Al-Qaeda did, Al-Qaeda had manpower, Saddam Hussein had money, and when Saddam Hussein was hiding in a rabbit hole or a spider hole in Iraq for those many, many months until he was captured in December of 2003, he was funding through his underlings, funding Al Qaeda to come in and cause disturbances for the U.S. military, basically to create skirmishes, roadside bombs, just to scratch the tiger, as Osama bin Laden had said years before. And that was pretty successful in really disrupting our efforts there. And so the FBI was over there trying to figure out these criminal and terrorist networks that were causing so much havoc for the U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq. And so I did that in 2004, working with the Iraqi police, found a couple of guys that one of them spoke English well enough, understood the American way of life because he had watched American movies growing up. And that guy and I, much like the president of Somalia and I, became very, very close friends. We spent almost 24 hours a day together for months on end, around the clock, chasing down bad guys, chasing down members of the 55 deck of cards. We worked very closely with the U.S. military. At that time, I was worked with the G2, which is the head of intelligence for the 1st Armored Division. That colonel became a very good friend of mine too, and we worked again around the clock. It's a target-rich environment, like being in St. Louis. There's lots of crime, so your entire shift is keeping you busy chasing bad guys. Well, when you're in a war zone in a place like Baghdad, in the middle of that war that's being led basically by Al Qaeda and executed by Al Qaeda at that time, it's a target-rich environment, and it's kind of hard to close your eyes at the end of the day and lay your head down on a pillow because there's always another rock to overturn and another clue to follow. So we worked continuously, became good friends, and in 2006, the United States military formed a contracting operation. Basically, they took what I had done in 2004 and turned it into an actual formula. And so they said, we want to embed investigators with the military and work with the local forces so that we can stop the insurgency, stop the bombings and everything else. And so I heard about this in November, December timeframe, 2006. The colonel I had worked with over in Iraq in 2004 said, "Hey, Tim, this is based on your work entirely, and this is you." And it turns out that at that time I had 3 kids in college, and the FBI, though it pays well for an investigator, doesn't pay as well as DOD does for contractors. So I was kind of lured away by the prospects of being able to pay a little more of my kids' tuition for college. And I had, as we mentioned before, I have a gaggle of kids. So I had 6 more that were going to be going through college, 3 in college at that time. So it was a prospect that, my wife and I discussed, and I thought, the same thing I was doing with the FBI, but I'll be doing it with DOD. And instead of wearing soft clothes for the FBI and carrying a handgun and, maybe an AR, I'll be wearing the uniform and military body armor, and I'll look just like a soldier, but I'll be embedded with the military and doing the same thing I did with the FBI. So it was a challenge. As Ray, we talked earlier about when I became a cop, I wanted to work and be a cop. And, this was continuing the same work, but gave me the ability. Better compensation was certainly a part of the equation, but the ability to do it with a very large kinetic force behind me at my disposal was a great incentive as well, because we were embedded directly with the military, and so we could get an immediate reaction. Hey, we just got this call. This meeting's taking place right here. It's taking place in 15 minutes at this coffee shop across from the mosque. They're going to be moving explosives into the mosque and building a car bomb tomorrow. And the military could react within seconds. Whereas in the FBI, you guys understand the paperwork trail.
Yeah.
And hey, we have this immediate intelligence report. Can we get this approved so we can get it out? It doesn't work that way in the military. In the military, it's like, this is what the source told us. This is how valuable the source is because they told us this last week and it turned out to be true. And a month ago, they told us this and that was true too. So this is what they're telling us right now. And the commander would say to the forces on the ground in that region, I want you there in 6 minutes. Get there. And it was great. And so we had very very deep and lasting effects in bringing peace to Baghdad and other regions. And it was a great program. So I left the Bureau in January of 2007, did that for about a year and a half, and left that war zone and went into another war zone that you and I have spent some time in, Fitz, Hollywood.
I was about to make that segue because I retired in November of '07, and through your brother Jim and you and a few others, we started this company, Nambic, Pay No Attention to the Man Behind the Curtain. I remember we all met out in LA, and Jim was still in the FBI, and you were between deployments. I know you just threw out some months there, but I could swear it was the winter time of 2008, and you had a big decision to make. And we were looking to make some contacts in Hollywood. We met with some studio heads. There's about 4 of us, 6 of us in the room, the 2 of us, your brother, and some others. And I remember everyone was saying, if we don't get this gig, Tim has to go back to Iraq next week. And like, then it's 5 days from now, 4 days from now. And we all felt for you. We knew it was a decent money-making gig over there, but you're going to be away for a year from your family. This, you could be closer to home. And I think after that one deployment you did, I think something came through in Hollywood or elsewhere, and you decided to stay behind. And that's when things started moving in that regard. Am I kind of close to the time frame there?
Yeah, no, you're right on the money. Yeah, we I believe it would have been maybe April of 2008. Okay. And this deployment coming up would have been an 18-month deployment in Afghanistan. So it would have been my first tour to Afghanistan, and I was going to be running the operation for the entity that I was working for at the time in Afghanistan. And on Wednesday, I was at Fort Benning, Georgia, had spent a few months at Fort Campbell with the 101st Airborne Division, training them up, and I was going to deploy with them to Afghanistan. And all geared up, ready to go, standing on the tarmac, waiting for a plane to come in, and the plane didn't land. And we waited and we waited and waited, no plane. It turns out the plane had mechanical difficulties, had to reroute, land somewhere else. They said, plane probably won't be here till maybe Monday, but let's say Wednesday just to be safe. So now I'm standing on the tarmac. I got a week, nothing to do till I leave for Afghanistan. My brother Jimmy calls me, says, let's go to LA and pitch some ideas. I said, okay. So the next morning, Thursday morning, I flew out to LA. That's when you came out and everybody else. And I believe we did those meetings on Friday. And it was a Friday afternoon when we finally went and pitched Ed Bernero, who was the showrunner of Criminal Minds, some ideas. And one of the things I pitched him was about my squad, my FBI squad, the National Capital Response Squad, and some of the personnel that were on it, some of the deployments, some of the things we did. Told Ed a couple of stories. Ed said, you know what, maybe we can pitch this to CBS. And he called his agent called CBS. It was almost 5 o'clock on a Friday evening. And I was like, there's no way in the world anybody's going to want to meet with us at 5 p.m. on a Friday. 5:15, we ended up in the room with CBS executives, pitched them the same stories I had just told Ed Bernero. CBS exec said, okay, we want it. We'll buy it. And so Wednesday, I was on the tarmac about to go to Afghanistan, wearing a U.S. Army uniform, camouflage, body armor, everything. And by Friday, I was an executive in an entertainment entity that didn't exist yet, which we ended up changing the name from Nambic to XG Productions, XG meaning former G. So that's how that transition took place. So I went from, now I'm not going to Afghanistan. So on Monday morning, I had to fly back to Fort Benning, Georgia, pick up all my stuff, return all my military gear, and prepare for the new war zone, Hollywood.
Yeah. Did you keep the body armor?
Boss.
Did you keep the body armor while you were in Hollywood? You didn't turn that back in, did you?
I had my own body armor for my days deploying with the Bureau, because the body armor they gave us was horrible. And so when I went to Afghanistan, I bought my own level 4 body armor, much better than the soft, 9mm resistant stuff that the Bureau gives you. I had some good body armor. So I did bring body armor with me and ballistic helmets and the like to Hollywood, because there you really have to worry more about, the threat really isn't getting shot with an AK-47 in the chest or the head. It's getting that knife shank that sticks out of your back because they stab you in the back. That's more the situation there.
Kind of the same like in Hollywood, right?
Yep.
So Yeah, I was technical advisor for Criminal Minds, working under Ed for seasons 3 and 4. Jim retired. He took over, which was all our game plan at the same by season 5. Then you get involved in Criminal Minds Beyond Borders uh, in that time frame, general time frame. So between the two Clemente brothers and me, we were all working at one version of Criminal Minds or not. I never moved out there. I know you did have a place. A few of your kids went out with you for a while. I was kind of doing stuff. I would fly in about 2 or 3 times a year and meet up with Jim once he retired. But it was an exciting time, and yeah, I was there in the early days of XG Productions too. And I probably could have climbed the corporate ladder if I chose, but I was kind of staying closer to home. And I know you guys were doing great out there. And down the line, you worked on NCICLA, the unit, Lie to Me, for TV shows and movies. Is it Now You Spy
Now
Me?
you see me. Now
Now
you
You
see
See
me.
Me. Smoking Aces 2, and The Killer Elite. And technical advisor, production consultant, or technical consultant, all those types of things, I suppose.
Yeah. So on some of those,
But writing
I
too.
was
You were doing writing too, I know.
yeah, I was writing too, but I was a writer's consultant on a lot of those TV shows. And unlike the movie The Killer Elite, Robert De Niro stars in that, and he had given me the script and asked me to read it. And he was asking for some input on, he knew I had been a sniper. He was going to play a sniper in the movie. He had some questions, so I gave him some tips and met with him a few times to talk about it. And then he called me one day and said, "Hey Tim, I got some people that want to talk to you." And he had the director and the executive producers or the producers of the movie Killer Elite. They were on set in Australia. They had started filming, and De Niro said, "Hey Tim, I want you to tell them what you told me, what they need to change in the script." And I was like, I'm I don't know that I should be doing this while they're filming, but okay, I gave them some ideas. Turns out they weren't offended. They loved the ideas. They said, "Yeah, these are great. We can implement them. We'll change the script right away. We'll send you the latest script after we make the changes." Thank you to De Niro for allowing these suggestions to come to us so that they could be implemented. And so that was a good experience. And De Niro and I became friends. We worked together. I helped him on a couple other projects, but one of the most iconic actors in the history of filmmaking, and a genuinely nice guy, very nice guy, and had a pleasure of getting to know him and knowing him all these years. And he he's vocal in a lot of regards on some things, but he lives actually a pretty quiet life, all things considered, when you consider who he is.
Interesting. Right?
No, so I think it's pretty neat. You doing things like that. What Tim, and I mean, you kind of just fell into that. I mean, it's not as though it just kind of just happened, and so it was meant to happen. But imagine if that didn't happen, and you went back to Afghanistan for 18 months. So everything's for a reason. It really
Yeah,
is.
it when you think about that, how different life could have been. I mean, the people I know now, the people I've worked with, scripts I've written, being home more with my family, whereas I would have had 2 R&R trips of 2 weeks each in that 18 months. That's it. That's all I would have seen my family. I would have been in limited communication with them. I would have tried to stay in contact by cell phone as much as I could. But in Afghanistan, it's not exactly like being in LA, where you have cell towers on every hilltop and every building roof. In Afghanistan, it's a lot different. Iraq wasn't bad because we had an embassy in Baghdad, so communications were actually pretty good. But Afghanistan's a whole different ball game. So yeah, my life would have been different. My family's existence would have been different, and I'm not complaining. It's been fun. I spent 15 years now working in Hollywood and working on features and TV shows and being on set and producing. And I haven't directed, but I have written 7 or 8 episodes for TV that were produced. So it's been a great experience. I absolutely can't complain, and I thank God that opportunity came to me when it did. And it was fortuitous, and extremely lucky.
You and your brother had a chance to do a little writing as well. And you've written. I know you wrote one book called Me God.
Well, I
Which
was actually at it's a I don't know how to describe it. It's called an Audible
Audiobook.
original. So
it's an audio.
it's an audio. It's basically an audio series in that we wrote and produced, and it was very well received. It was the story of the DC sniper case, which Fitz worked as well, and it did really well. And we've done several others since then. They're known as Audible originals on Audible, which is part of Amazon. And I think we've done a total of like about 22 projects through XG Productions with Audible. And one of them, which I produced and wrote this past summer, is called Invisible, Life and Death on a Reservation. And it's about the Wind River Indian Reservation and some of the missing and murdered Indigenous women cases that are outstanding there, including one where a woman lost two of her daughters. One daughter was murdered, outrightly murdered, and the other one died under extremely mysterious circumstances, and it should have been investigated as a murder, but it wasn't. It was determined to be an accidental death, which I believe is absolutely wrong. And Fitz, this would fall into more you guys' territory, but I think an equivocal death investigation is absolutely needed there. And I know we've talked about it in the past, and we're still trying to get that case moving forward to be investigated more deeply, and because it's a tragic case, tragically uninvestigated, I should say, not really investigated at all. And so that Audible project called Invisible was actually submitted for a Pulitzer nomination by Audible just last month, because the reporting in it and the investigation in it was done by myself, Francie Hakes, who's a former federal prosecutor, former DOJ attorney, and I know you guys know her, and another guy, Keith Billiot, who was a buddy of mine, who was a DEA agent for 31 years and is also a Native American. He's from the United Huma Nation of Louisiana. It's a non-federally recognized tribe down there, and Keith is very active in Indigenous and Native American issues. And one of the biggest issues right now in America is these missing and murdered Indigenous women and other people cases that are just left unsolved. And so we're trying to change that. And so hopefully Invisible gets some more attention, more people listen to it, more people put pressure on politicians and law enforcement to do the right thing in these cases, so that these things don't go on for years or decades without being solved.
And Tim, all of these audio books or audio entities that you're putting out, they're either on the XG production website or the audible.com website. People can purchase them that way.
Yeah, Audible. I think I don't know if there's links from our website. They're listed on our website, so you can find titles that we've done. But I believe you have to go to Audible, and I don't know if you need a subscription or if you can just one-off buy things to listen to. And I'm not even sure the cost if you do the one-offs. But we have a bunch of them, a whole different array of mostly true crime stuff. And as you're well aware, Fitz, at XG Productions, our goal is not to highlight the criminals and make these criminals seem like heroes. It's quite the opposite. We want the victims to be highlighted. We want to tell the story of the victims. We want the victims to receive justice in the end. And we want the perpetrators to receive justice in the end, which hopefully means prosecution and imprisonment in most cases.
Yeah, I was a part of several of those productions, Tim, and they were very high quality, and victims, witnesses, law enforcement folks, and I was very honored to be a part of those about Unabomb, DC Sniper. Now there's one about 9/11 attacks, and one from there. So it's an amazing series. I would suggest everyone check it out. XG Productions, the list of the different Audible books out there, or on the Audible.com website. This has been a fascinating discussion. Is there anything else you can tell us what you're doing now? And by the way, your background is Montana. One of your big productions is you're building a house somewhere in Montana. You bought Ted Kaczynski's property, I heard, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, his cabin wasn't available. I wanted to renovate it, but but I hear it's still in the FBI lab or in museum
Something like
somewhere. So I'm trying to replicate it. Yeah. So I'm living on a hilltop in Montana, much like Ted Kaczynski did, but I'm on the right side of the law, unlike he who was on the wrong side of the law. And I'm not building bombs. I'm building a house and still writing scripts, still working on trying to get some features made. So hopefully we can touch base again, maybe in a year or so, and we'll talk about movies I've had produced. We'll see.
I would love to do this. And I've always thought, Tim, you were one of the more interesting guys and dedicated guys I've met, not just in the Bureau, but, personally and in other professional elements. I've only really worked on one continent. I've done some training in some others. You've been all over the place, actively working. Just my career path didn't quite go that way, but I was always impressed just following you from afar, and of course your brother Jim telling different stories. Where's your brother? Hey Jim, where's Tim at now? And well, we can't really say, but it's a country it's hard to pronounce. Oh yeah, okay, or it has no defined borders yet, or something like that. And you kind of shared some of that with us. So yeah, I personally appreciate all the work you've done in the Bureau, and I know you're not none of us here is a veteran, but you're very supportive of veteran affairs. You have several children in the military or who served.
Two sons, Marine Corps, and so two Marine veteran sons, and I do try and support the military. I'm part of a charitable organization called the Special Operations Charity Network, where we do what we can to try and support those who have served our country and done so honorably.
I think you're friendly with Gary Sinise. I admire him from afar because of all the work he's done with veterans. The actor, of course, from Forrest Gump, and what was he, Lieutenant Jim? Was it
Lieutenant Dan? Lieutenant Dan. Yep. Yeah, Gary is one of the greatest human beings I've had the pleasure of meeting, and probably one of the greatest human beings that walks the earth today. He lives a life of service and sacrifice for military, first responders, the families of those of the fallen Gold Star families, and his foundation, the Gary Sinise Foundation, is one of the greatest entities that exists today. All the listeners should go and look at their website, the Gary Sinise Foundation, and support them if you can in any way. He does great things for those who have done great things for this country. None of us would enjoy the freedoms we do without the people that serve and do so voluntarily and selflessly.
Agree 100%. I'll take us out, Ray. But any last question or comment?
No, just Tim. I'm going to echo what Jim said. The only thing is that I think Jim shortchanged himself a little bit. I know you've worked on several continents. I'm only just the one, and Jim said one, but he's done something that neither you or I have. He's worked underwater in that kayaking or whitewater rafting thing. So he's got a little bit more experience underwater than you and I.
He does. So. He does. Yeah, I spend most of my time, on that whitewater rafting trip. I spent pretty much all the time in the boat, in the raft, because we were rafting. But Jim wanted to experience what I wonder what it's like 10 feet below the surface. So yeah, we got to give credit for that.
In a vertical whirlpool, and I'm a better man for it now. Let me tell you.
I'll bet you are.
On that pleasant note. Tim, again, thank you very much for joining us on Cold Red. Ray, of course, great always being the co-host with you and the salient questions you ask. And everybody out there, feel free to follow us, subscribe to us on our social media sites, coldredpodcast.com. You can check us out. Who's going to be our next guest, who our past guest, different links. And on that note, I will say goodnight to everyone, including Ray and Tim, and everyone have a safe rest of your day and safe week.
Thank you.
And don't let anyone harm you out there. Always know your situation going on around you. See you, folks.
Bye-bye.